Here are a whole bunch of currencies that no longer can be used as a tool of barter. We have Arpad from StarPath Academy, who has lived through hyperinflation. And we need to talk about that since, quite frankly, that's what I think has already begun, but that's what lies ahead for all of us. So let's get what that experience was straight from the horse's mouth. Arpad, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me, Lynette. It's always great to talk with you.
I think that this is like the single most important conversation for people to listen to, because they always think, well, that happens over there, not here. Well, I don't know. What do you think about that?
It always feels like that until it happens to you. And that's not just hyperinflation. It's always like that in every aspect in life. And it's not a unique situation, the situation of Romania that went through, because every currency that I know of in Eastern Europe and friends that I had around the world, most of the countries went through this. And nothing special about them, and some of the countries were big and some of them were like empires, like the Soviet Empire. So, and it's not even the economy sometimes, because the Romanian economy was actually doing quite well under Ceausescu, the dictator, at least while foreign exchange wise. So we didn't have any external debt. The economy was working, the people were working. Now, granted, we didn't have freedom and we were suffering in our private lives, but the economy and the numbers were actually much better than the United States number right now. So it's something to reflect on, that these things happen because things get mismanaged and things globally on the global theater change very fast. So sometimes it feels like nothing's really happening for decades, and then under a few days or a few years, definitely things shift intensely.
Mm-hmm. Well, you made a comment about things get mismanaged. I mean, when you're looking at sound money, that creates a management tool, right? It creates restrictions around what the governments can do. So can you speak a little bit more to the mismanaged part?
Yeah, absolutely. So really what for me, sound money is, or money in general, is an accounting system. And sound money forces you to do accurate accounting. So if I trade or two countries trade with each other, then and if that trade is registered in sound money, then there's no way how we can cheat each other, right? We have to produce some value, some good, and we have to exchange it at the rate that we have agreed to exchange that on. However, when we're printing a currency or paper currency, we're valuing the paper currency exactly, the paper currency at today's rate. However, the future rate may be totally different. And usually something is tied to that. Why do we believe that a piece of paper has value? Right. Sometimes the booming economy of a country, sometimes kind of the army is reinforcing that, or the general belief. And I think this is what I believe, the belief system, the belief patterns that we have as humans, that how the future will look. So as that changes, things change really rapidly, because we kind of add value. In my perspective, value only really relies within the human skull. So we think a piece of paper has value because I believe that you will take it for me and I will be able to get your goods and services for that. But as soon as the faith of government fades away, then the faith that printed that currency also fades away. Now, sometimes it comes in two stages, and that's my experience. Sometimes the faith in government is lost first. However, kind of people still believe in the currency because they have used it all. It's kind of a bias that we have.
Yeah.
We have used it all our lives. Why shouldn't it, still have value? But in this case, the sooner people get out of it, the better, because eventually the faith in currency will be lost as well. And at that point, everything just crumbles, and we're going back to basics, to actual physical items and their true worth, what it is when you apply it in some cases or in the economy. So that was the case in Romania as well. First, it became the first, we lost the faith of government, of the communist government. A revolution happened in 89. Inflation was really high already because currency and the economy was being mismanaged by the managerial class, I would say.
Hmm.
However, after that, within 1 or 2 years, the faith in currency was also lost, and we went through hyperinflation. So really, it's really mismanaging the your position, what you have been,
Your
because
perception?
power comes through how we perceive someone is powerful. So if
Yes.
you kind of you mismanage that, then eventually you'll lose that power. And that kind of happens pretty fast at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, well, when it is a shell game, when it is a con game, that requires confidence. So you're talking about the government, and correct me if I'm wrong, but are you talking about the government managing people's expectations? Yes?
Exactly. Expectations, but managing people's expectations, but also trying to meddle with the economy. So, in the sense
Hmm.
that giving false incentives and putting the finger on their scale in the economy, what is worth and what is not worth doing, right? So, as soon as more and more they get involved into managing and micromanaging people's lives, and that's what we're seeing today where they
Yes.
want certain percentages of your wealth going this way. You should not spend on that. And modern monetary theory comes to mind. Eventually, they lose control, and at that point, everything is lost. Now, with technology, they believe that they will be able to do a better job. So this kind of utopian thinking that somehow some people at some level of the government know how you should spend your money better than you yourself. It always comes back periodically. Sometimes it's 50 years, the period, sometimes it's 80 years, but this always comes back. That's what has been happening in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, and it always fails. And when it fails, it takes everything with it, basically.
So where do can you draw the comparisons between what's happening in Eastern Europe and what's happening, say, in the US or Australia or anywhere else in the world?
Well, I think it's incentives. So people have their own incentives and um, how the government tries to kind of manipulate that. At some point, the working class or the people who actually produce, because working class is very Soviet style talk. However, the actual producers of the world kind of suddenly realize that it's no longer worth producing because if somebody can print the same wealth out of thin air, then why should you and I spend our blood and sweat in toiling and working and producing anything if the same wealth is also being produced, at least on paper, by someone else and being spent in wars or in foreign countries and meddling into world economies that we have no control over, we have no say over,
Hmm.
and we have no gain really. And at that point, we kind of lose in the incentive to participate. And as soon as more and more people disassociate or push back and start stepping back and not producing the stuff that we were kind of taking for granted. The thing that you have food in your stores, you take for granted that somebody produced that, somebody brought it in,
Right.
somebody got the oil out of the ground to ship it there. There's a very, very delicate system. But as soon as more and more people check out from here, then suddenly the cracks start appearing. So people start papering it over. The governments at least try to paper it over or put more incentives here and there, but eventually it's just not worth participating. As soon as the actual producers of the world kind of pull back, don't start not participating, then the whole thing becomes a paper tiger and just shreds into pieces very fast.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because aren't we kind of seeing that? I mean, China, when they pegged their currency, so they became the manufacturers to the world. But if you look at what's happening in their quiet revolution, the lay down generation that don't want to be the producers anymore because they can't afford their lifestyle, so they're doing something different. They're just not participating. Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about here? Because that's what I'm seeing in China.
That's definitely the case. That was definitely the case in Soviet Romania. So I was very young. So some of these experiences are my parents' experiences, and what they told me and how I observed as a child and then a young adult, what they went through. But that was definitely the case. We even have this kind of saying that we pretended to work while they pretended to pay us, so that was kind of the inner joke in Romania that eventually everybody was just making sure that the numbers look good. However, the underlying actual actions in the economy was disassociated from the numbers that you can print on screens or in our case on paper. So when you can lie about statistics, when you can say we're not in a recession because somebody kind of just made up a new term and said, no, we're going to calculate these things differently. And you can put out numbers about jobs and then you can revisit the numbers. And when it's really just becoming a game of illusions, eventually that only goes so far. So just like how Wile E. Coyote kind of runs off the cliff, and the illusion keeps him there for a few seconds, in this case, a few years maybe, but after that reality will hit and he will hit the ground, right? So
That is a really good
that's
analogy.
how I kind of imagine the economy as well. It's this big ship that kind of has its own speed and it's kind of it goes in one direction. However, it takes a while for you to realize that it has already stopped. And I feel that that is sort of like what's happening right now.
So you feel like the economy is really stopped, but people just don't realize that yet?
That's my guess. Not necessarily stopped. However, it has been reorganized behind the curtains in the sense that when a couple of companies, big, huge international companies, comprise the most of the S&P, right? Or if there are
Right.
only a few big companies that are driving economic indicators, that economic indicator is false at that point. It's really just, it's just a number to play with because you can always print money or you can always just pump more money into Apple stock or this stock or that stock and it appears that the economic indicator is looking good, but it's really being propped up by Nvidia. And I'm not a stockbroker, don't quote me on these and don't take advice from me. However, I analyze systems, right? I'm a systems engineer, and that's what I'm looking at. And I'm looking at the system that was designed to track things no longer is tracking the things that we used to think it tracks. And at
Right.
that point, eventually reality will hit and it will settle in.
Well, you make such a good point. And even if we look at the inflation numbers, and hedonics, replacing one thing for another because you don't like the way that looks in there, isn't that all part of the shell game to keep people in? Because then it's easier to rob them, right?
Exactly. So when when you can define what inflation is in your terms to make look the numbers better. However, if you go down to the store and try to buy eggs or to really look at gas prices where they were a couple of years ago when they are now, you can see that there's a disjointment between the reality that the average people live on the day-to-day basis, racking up credit card debt, all-time highs, and instead of what the kind of the numbers show that everything is honky dory and we're like
Right.
the stock numbers is all-time highs again. Who's investing? Are the people who can barely afford eggs, are they invested in the stock market? I don't think so, right? So what does that represent? Does it represent the average people's net worth, their well-being, who's participating in the game? Because if not, what I'm seeing is really kind of a bifurcation of society.
Yes.
One is pushing numbers, pushing, economic indicators, uh, making fast cash in some markets, while the general public and the middle class is shrinking and kind of falling away. And I don't think that historically that never leads to any good.
It doesn't, but there's also been this huge move to democratize the stock market. So where you look at, a share
Well,
that
you
might be
always need
selling.
bag holders, don't you?
Pardon
You
me?
you always need bag holders, right?
Yes.
So you always need someone to unload and, make your profit before everything changes.
Yes, exactly. So they do the fractional shares and they do all of this. And so you can round up your spending and put it over here into the stock market right when all the insiders are getting out. That's what happens every time, right?
Exactly. So you can know, I'm again not giving advice or anything like that, but if you take a look at the smart money moving out of some shares and taking profits, and I don't want to call out companies, but if you take a look at how many millions of dollars the BlackRock CEO has taken out from his position in the last 2 years, what does that mean? Is he now want to retire and enjoy his life, or does he know more, right? So these are all,
Right.
of course, speculations. Don't go by these or don't invest, just because I'm looking at things. However, you really have to think that how long can the con game continue? And just imagine, use your own imagination what can happen at the end. And in some cases, in our case in Romania, the stock market never really crashed. However, in real value, because we hyperinflated, it never really caught up. For instance, it can crash upwards. That's what I'm saying. So
Yes.
sometimes people also say there's a really good word for the crack up boom, where everything from the outside and by numbers, it looks really amazing that, hey, look, the company that my mother worked for in Romania, their stocks crashed upwards. It quadrupled, it, tenfolded at some point. However, also the price of bread went from 1 Romanian lei to 10,000 Romanian lei, right? So even if you quadrupled your money in the stock market or her shares, eventually the whole pension that she had when she took it out as a whole, as a one-time disbursement, she was able to purchase a purse with it. So the stock went up. However, real life actual commodities or just the regular things on the street, there's no comparison. Everything is relative. It's a number and you compare it, but you have to compare one thing into another thing. And you really just need to use numbers in order to get your percentages or get your comparisons. You cannot just look at one thing. And if this went up from 30,000 to 40,000, that means you're doing well. That's not such a big gain when something like, the cost of living has doubled or tripled for the lower class. Like even if all of their money would have been invested in one thing, maybe would have gone up 25%, that money would not even cover their living expenses because living expenses went up double, right? And that's really just the beginning. When this kind of accelerates into hyperinflation, people have no idea how fast you can lose your wealth or whatever you
Right.
had before. And just to give people a comparison, what I always say, if you want to think about 100% inflation, I think even on paper in Romanian hyperinflation, they never wrote more than 200%, which is kind of a total wash because we went from, I just calculate bread price, right? Or the price of copper or the price of aluminum in Romanian lei. That's what I've been tracking there because my father was a machinist and I happen to know those numbers better. However, if you take a look at that, even if you go with the fake numbers. If you have a 200% inflation or 200% inflation 3 times in a year, right? And you start losing half of your money. Think about, let's say you have $10,000 US dollars in the bank. The
Mm-hmm.
next year, the purchasing power of that is $5,000. The next year is 2,500. The next year is 1,000, 250 and so on. So suddenly after two doublings of inflation or three doublings of inflation, your money's worth nothing. But that's the same. Now, maybe you had 1 million. Now that's worth 500,000, 250, 125. Suddenly, everything was gone. So within 7 years, which we had kind of, that's what I calculate, the price, so my family had to actually some money on my mother's side in the bank that was locked away in a quote unquote the safest investment, government bonds and everything else.
Oh, good.
Now that was locked away, right? And so they never took the money from us. However, by the time we were actually able to get it out from the very long bank holiday, the same amount of money that would have purchased 3 apartments eventually purchased a black and white television set. So people have to understand like what is a doubling, how fast you can lose money when inflation gets really high. And it compounds because they just calculate,
Yes.
well, this year it was this, that year was that. That's usually on top of the previous year. So it's very hard for people to kind of grasp the concept of it. So when on my channel, when I made people to do an experiment, how would they fare in a hyperinflation or not even hyperinflation, but just like a higher inflationary scenario. And I did this probably 2 or 3 years ago. I asked them to, when they get their salary, just act as if they only have half of it. And then 2 months from now, act as if they only have 1/4 of it. Right. And that point, that's probably enough for them. But think about that is your living standard being washed away because somebody hyperinflated the currency to get rid of their debt. Right.
Right.
So at that point, your savings, your retirement funds, everything will be washed away to pay off some sort of debt, or, usually that's the case because they want to hyperinflate debt away. But in some cases, it's just hyperinflation because the government has dissolved, in our case, in Romania, or in some cases, it's always a bit different, but the effect on the average people is always the same. They get reset to the bare minimum and to the actual physical items that they own or have in their hand.
So, so there's like a lot to unpack here. And this is a phenomenal conversation because really it is all about perception management. If they can
Correct.
manage how you feel about what you see and experience, then you move forward in the manner that serves their purpose. So when they talk about right now, all the talk is about inflation. Oh, and inflation is slowing down, or is reducing. What they really want you to think is that inflation is going away. But what happens to the prices of that loaf of bread or that gallon of gas or anything else? It's just moving up a teeny bit more slowly, unless they have removed something to put something else in its place.
Right. You can always, quote unquote, in numbers, you can always replace a steak with ground meat, right? However, it's not the same. So,
It's not the same.
yeah, so it's perception management. And I think the economy for a long time now is perception management. And just to give you an example, right? And you can calculate it the way you like it. But if you would need to purchase only American made stuff, back 25, 30, maybe 40 years ago, people were able to do that, and they were able
Yep.
to live in a, pretty okay manner, I would say. Sometimes only one person, working in the family, being able
Exactly.
to support a family of four, right? At least with one salary. And they purchased American-made products right now. Now that has shifted to two people working in the family and no longer only be able to afford American-made products. Now somewhere else, at a way, way cheaper price, they have to produce the stuff so we can afford. If you would buy only American-made shirts, well, how long your salary would go? Would that suddenly feel like it's less, right? So your perception, because you're able to quote unquote buy shirt just like how your parents used to do, right? That doesn't mean the living standard you have the same because the shirt wasn't made in the US. It's a different product, right? It's no longer cotton. And I don't want to go into quality of shirts here, but however, if you feel that, you just you're way, way doing way worse than they were because you have only the illusion that you're still doing so good, because you're being supplied by cheap products from, from China. However, if they suddenly would say, we no longer accept currency at this rate, then you would immediately feel the difference in price. And that can be done very fast. No, I don't want to speculate here, but if the BRICS come to a conclusion this October and suddenly things change and they no longer want to take the US dollar as the global reserve currency, you immediately feel all of that built up fantasy that we have been through in the last 20, 25 years will evaporate immediately. And there's nothing you as a person can do about that.
There are about 3 things that I want to talk about in there. This is a great conversation. Number 1, I was there when Nixon took us off the gold standard and reassured the public that if you just buy American-made products, that's why this reminded me of that, then you are not going to feel this at all, right? So that was the first lie when they took away the gold to create any of those restrictions. I was a new stockbroker in the 80s, and all the talk was about globalization. So all of that manufacturing, like I first went away to school to Fairleigh Dickinson, which was right across the river from Manhattan. And I was dating this young man, very handsome guy. And I was dating him, and his father worked in the garment district in Manhattan. And we went in there, and I remember I wish I still had it, this great sheepskin coat and all of these other things. But all of those jobs have been shipped overseas when they made the arrangement with China to peg their currency to our currency, because then those corporations, to your point, then they could determine what those profits were. And so we allowed those deflationary forces to come in. And I remember when this was happening, and I remember I don't remember exactly what it was, but being amazed at the quality level and the price. But that product was now being made in China, where the salaries were so much lower, and so you were fooled into thinking, well, wow, this is great. But as we all just saw from the supply chain debacle, this is not so great. And all of those good jobs where one person could support a family of 4, because his mom didn't work. The dad worked in that family. And I mean, those jobs were shipped overseas, and are they coming back now? Are we suddenly going to have a garment district again, or a manufacturing? I mean, they're trying to do that, but I know that's not quite on hyperinflation, but is that a possibility to regain some of that old glory? Because people do think that this cannot, they said this when they were creating the new system, that people cannot help but think that at some point this will regain some purchasing power again.
Well, I don't think that will. Maybe a new dollar will after we come back and start producing stuff, and there's actually some worth to the economy, the U.S. economy producing, like flooding the world economy with really good quality, high products, which is, I don't see it's right there. However, what I want to say is that when you purchase that shirt, or I guess it was a shirt.
It was a sheepskin jacket. Yeah. It was gorgeous.
And was that made in the U.S. or was that made already? That was in the U.S.
That was in like 71 or 72, right?
So that same product got replaced with a Chinese-made product. That means to me, as an observer, an outside observer, that means to me that you, like at that point, from that point on, you were actually losing your living standards.
Yes.
However, you kind of had the illusion of the same living standards because it was subsidized by cheap labor, probably very bad, in bad condition, cheap labor from China. So that means somewhere some productivity was stolen by the Chinese government from its own citizens to be able to, for people to be able to still achieve the same living standards, however, the living standard was already being lost. However, they
Yes.
still wanted to keep the illusion of the same living standards. And now, as that is coming to end, then it's kind of like Wile E. Coyote falling off the edge because he did not realize that you have already start losing living standards since 70 once you got off from the gold standard. At
Yeah.
that point, it was just how long can we make this illusion going with the petrodollar, with other, global um, arrangements to make sure that they don't get the blame immediately and
You're
they
right.
can
There's
still
a
play
disconnect.
and put the money in their own coffers until this party ends, basically. And it will end eventually. I don't know when exactly, but that's why I meant like you already lost or start losing the living standard, and now it's coming to fruition because it's no longer there. And the other countries will need to make a decision if they want to raise their own living standards at the cost of not using the dollar, or or keep on continuing at what they're doing right now.
Well, you brought up a really interesting point about the petrodollar and also about what happens if China decides they don't want a dollar. And I mean, I really hate to say this, but the Federal Reserve is pretty darn arrogant, and the U.S. is pretty darn arrogant in thinking that the U.S. dollar will always retain that standard at the same exact time that brand new financial plumbing is being built on a global basis, and it has to do with the technology. And we in the U.S., according to the Bank for International Settlements, are really falling behind that. So we think that, the almighty dollar, and they're using it in trade and all of this, which has been declining over a number of years now. But I mean, if they when they have that plumbing in place, and Saudi Arabia is part of the BRICS, so we've already lost that support on the dollar's dominance, or the petrodollar, so to speak. I mean, could you see a time when they just turned on the new financial plumbing and turned off the old? I mean, can it happen just that fast, do you think?
I think it will not happen that fast, but it will definitely think it will happen, in a shorter period of time that people think it will happen.
Yeah.
So it's probably not going to be immediate because it needs some synchronization. Whenever a single country tried to do that, whether it was Saddam or Gaddafi or anyone else, they kind of pay the ultimate price, right? And so now they kind of learn, right, from it. But just I don't want to get too much into global politics because,
Right.
my incentives lie with the United States and the freedom it provides. So when I'm talking about a global system, that doesn't mean that I want to have that global system or I hate that
Right.
global system or I don't want a global. It's just me, an observer, observing things. I would prefer if the US dollar would stay a global reserve currency because usually the values that are spread around the world are usually coming from that source country, right? When the British Empire had their own currency as a global reserve currency, the British values got spread out, right? When it
Mm-hmm.
was the US, freedom and liberty kind of got spread out. When that would shift to another country, its own values would be spread out. Now, I don't want to know, your opinion about like what would be happening if we would be living in a world where Russia dictates kind of what's new and trendy and how people or how countries should behave, China. So please understand when I'm talking about these things, I'm talking as an observer, not
Right.
taking part in this. So, but if you take a look at that, countries like Russia and like China have learned that they cannot be dependent on the US dollar anymore.
Yes. I
Now,
think everybody's learned
oligarchs'
that.
money could be frozen, whatever. They have learned their lesson. And unfortunately, this system where we have control over, the flow of money have been abused too much in
Mm-hmm.
order to quote unquote punish other global actors. And now they have an immune system and they have built up an immune system against that. So that also means this power that the US used to have is fading away rapidly. And at some point, when enough countries come together and have their own mechanism for trade, they're going to switch all at once.
Hmm.
They cannot do it one at a time because they
Right,
learned their lesson, right?
right,
So it's probably going to be with some discussions, or even the US will be probably part of it diplomatically, because I don't think nobody wants to up I hope nobody wants to upset the global economies in such a way where we have world wars again, but it will definitely happen within a span of 2 years and everything is said and done. And usually that means turmoil for some individual countries where they are so engulfed in their own inner problems that they don't have time to react to global world orders.
hmm hmm
The Soviet Union comes to mind. So some people have been born and lived and died while the Soviet Union reigned supreme.
yeah,
However, it stopped. And when it stopped suddenly, and the people there suffered greatly. People who were just regular people were born in that country to mother and father, loving mother and father. They never participated in anything. They just lived their life. And one day, the rug has been pulled away from them. And empty stores and all of the images that you can see about the Soviet Union and shock therapy and everything else. And the individual person as a person does, you cannot, it cannot bear fault. They were born in a system, they lived the system. The only fault that they
right.
have had was that they didn't educate themselves to know that the as I guess my grandmother would have said was that there never has been a song that lasted forever. So when the song stops, then you'll see, who has chairs and who doesn't have chairs. And it will stop suddenly. I have that feeling. Suddenly doesn't mean it will happen within a week. However, I think within 1 year or 2 year span, everything will change and you will no longer recognize the new world.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And you also brought up another point in that one country won't do this, but if they come together in force, and I would say that that's true for the individual. And, the importance of community, whether you're, working in a coordinated way like the central banks used to. But would you please explain to the viewers the advantage of coming together in a local community as you're going through this to survive this mess and, I don't know, maybe even thrive through it, and what that was like for your family?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, back then, the morals were different in the society. In the 80s, 90s, I think
Hmm.
especially Eastern Europe was different. The family structure was different. And it was kind of very natural for us to pull together. I have 10 cousins. I'm the youngest one. I was kind of the baby cousin. So everyone else had either spouses or some even waiting for children. So I was the youngest one. So we had already a bigger family community, but it was kind of spread out, people working in different cities. However, as soon as the hyperinflation hit Romania, we knew what to do, right? We knew that we had to leave the city and go back to the land that my grandfather has owned. He has already passed away, but my grandmother was still there. And we were able to all pull together and start working the land, right? We didn't even have tools. However, everybody had some skill. One would have skill to create tools from farming equipment, hand tools. My mother would be able to make gloves. So we would be able to pull together our skills naturally. We used to have bigger families back then, and even if you went back to your hometown, that usually meant that, your neighbor was maybe a cousin of your grandmother or grandparents or somewhere between them. My grandfather was one out of seven siblings. So it kind of went back to this community where everyone pulled together and we were able to produce together, share the whatever we produced in the farm and live through it that way. But that we understood that immediately and we knew what to do. I think that pulling together our resources and pulling together our knowledge and just being able to fit into a very small house and heat it with just a cast iron stove. That meant that, everyone was living together, pulling together, and that way you're able to survive through anything, I would say, even if the outside world is crumbling around you. So that had a really big, I would say, positive effect on me as a young person, because I suddenly knew the importance of community and family and being able to own a skill, to produce something and live like that. And I don't think that's the case anymore today. So probably the skills that we have or we have been taught was just like putting together Excel spreadsheets or something like that. We have lost the manual skills to rebuild from zero, basically. So that's the problem. So I think one would have to start with actually acquiring skills that you can trade and skills that you can use to help others and barter with your skills. So once you work on that, you automatically start building a community around that, because like for me, instance, in the United States, I went to locksmithing schools just out of curiosity. But as soon as I went there, I started learning, I started making friends. Suddenly someone invited me how to skin goats, right? So immediately the community, as you're acquiring skills, you start forming this loosely formed community. And as soon as you have the level of trust where you can barter
Yep.
between each other,
Yep.
you have someone to kind of call the community and pull together in case something happens, and you can work on that. But it's quite important. I think it's probably the only way to survive hyperinflationary situations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that, more. Do you see, I mean, I see a movement in homesteading, in learning those skills. I can lay irrigation if I had to. Not that I want to, but I've done it. So I have that skill set. So do you think that that is partially the answer? And a critical answer for people to set up a community now. Maybe go to a farmer's market and meet your local growers. Maybe learn how to lay irrigation or hammer, build a house or something. Do you think we've got the time to do that? Because we got to do something.
Well, the time is running out. I think ideally, probably COVID was the best, dry run of this.
Yes, I would agree
Ideally, you should have
100%.
used that situation to start building a community, because suddenly it would be easier to pull together with like-minded people. But I think, the second best time is always now. So what people can, I don't want to give too many tips or anything like that, but exactly how you said, as soon as you start looking for producers that maybe you're not interested in growing chickens, but you still want to eat eggs, instead of buying, eggs from the supermarket, maybe you have to pay more, but that money is going towards a good cause. You're supporting someone. If you can afford it, then why don't you just have this maybe bartering set up with a local producer where maybe you produce something for them, or even if you just pay them, just to get to know a network of people
Right.
who
Create
you can
relationship.
rely on, right? And they have that trust with you, that they know that you're a trustworthy person. And if they need help in these cases, they can call you. So, and for that, really, it's a change of attitude that has to happen, of what can I give to the community? How can I be a valuable member of a community, instead of like, oh, where can I buy this cheaper, right? What can I
Right.
give back? What can I produce for them? Um, Sometimes what can I teach them, right? It's
Right.
better to, yeah. So you have to have that mind shift in order to be able to become a valuable person. And one of the most valuable things today, I would say, is honesty and being straight up, being straightforward. I think it's a commodity that people could easily acquire. However, they don't for some reason. And as soon as you get to this down to earth community, and they can feel that you're a person, that you're trustworthy, you're going to have a place there.
Yes.
So work on yourself first and foremost.
I think that's really critically important. And it is always, what can I bring to the table? Because though a lot of people think that they don't have required skills or important skills. I mean, it's never too late to learn, but I believe that everybody brings value to the table in their own way. What can you do? And we can come together in a global community as well to do a silent revolution by saying no to this stuff and saying yes to this stuff. Because, I mean, I just did something earlier with Adam and it kind of made a click. I know I'm turning around. But this is a rock that contains gold and silver, okay? In order to get the gold and silver out of this rock, they have to smash it. I mean, they have to dig it out of the ground. They have to smash it up. There is so much time and effort that goes into this. This is, I don't even know how much I have left in here, but this is how much effort that takes. It takes no effort at all for me to get real money. And I think that's true for the value of humans as well, right? Whatever you can just do easily without any thought has not as much value as taking what you have and learning new skills. And so you're going to buy the eggs from a farmer's market, which is great. Hey, do you need some help on your farm? Can I give you a day's worth of labor? What will you give me in return? Probably a whole bunch of eggs.
Right.
Right?
Exactly. My wife and I, the easiest way how we was able to get into communities like this was baking bread. So turns out that
skill.
if you can bake really good bread, people will start loving you. And especially if you give it away for free, like how we do, then you'll get a name for yourself. And an easy way, and it takes practice. It's not easy. You don't acquire that skill within a week, but definitely a few months you can acquire it and your life will change, trust me, just by the quality of the food that you will eat. And as you start caring more for yourself, for the quality of food that you eat, you'll start caring for everyone else and they will feel that love and they will feel that kind of that the caring, really, how you just care for others.
Yes.
And people, not everyone, but people will return the favor. And that's a really good way to start, right? And maybe something else is for you, not bread, but that was one thing that you can know. It doesn't have to be skills that you need a lot of equipment, is what I'm saying. But you really need to give something. And as for gold in that piece of rock, exactly, that's proof that you have put the work in and you can produce something valuable, an honest measure of work, basically.
Exactly.
And that's what gold was. And historically, that was, people who had gold during hyperinflation, they were able to really thrive in those situations because suddenly, as everything else was losing value, real commodities, real things, and gold and silver went up in price, right? Price is really just a number, but they held their value and probably went up in value because suddenly people wanted a safe haven to go into. And I've seen people now that gold is up, like how you can trade, or they look at indicators of this is okay if they Bollinger Bands and price averages, and this is the time to sell, right? I'm not giving advice. You can do whatever you want. However, in our case, in hyperinflation Romania, gold was not like something that you buy and sell for profit because the profit was deteriorating in paper. What it really was for us, it was a insurance policy. And just like if your insurance policy is going up in price, that means there's probably, like, for instance, if it would be fire insurance, would you get away, would you sell your fire insurance on your house? That means if the fire insurance in your neighborhood is going up, that means there's smoke around you. You just can't smell it. So that means that it's an indicator that something is going wrong and it's going up in price. So you better hold on to it. Right. For us, gold and silver was never really something that you think about the stocks that, oh, if it went up in price, you can sell it and then you can do something, you can buy a yacht or something like that. What it is, it's an insurance policy. And it's really, honestly, it's an insurance policy in losing faith in government. Yes. So sometimes it lags, sometimes it's kind of you can be used as an indicator for problems to come in the future. It's not really a one-to-one ratio with inflation. For me, that was the case. It usually tracks inflation very well long term, but short term, these spikes and the price movements are really the faith in government. Is that, are we losing it, or are we or are we having a fun time in the country that we're living in? So that's my opinion, and maybe this is true, maybe it's not, but usually government want to suppress the price long term of precious metals because it's really their grade. Like if the gold price is going up, that means people are giving a bad grade on the performance of government. And that means it's, for me, it's just like fire insurance. You don't want to sell it when there's smoke outside.
That is such a good point. And we could go on. We could go on and on. This has been a phenomenal conversation. But how about you telling everybody how they can access you? And of course, all that information is below as well.
Sure, thank you. So I run this YouTube channel, Starpath Academy, and usually that's where I share some of the stories or kind of knowledge tidbits that I've had, or anecdotes in most cases, of what I have lived through, what are my observations, and sometimes I invite people from other countries who have lived through hyperinflationary scenarios just to soak in. They can share their experiences on the YouTube channel Starpath Academy.
That's fabulous. Is there anything else? I mean, we haven't covered enough. I mean, I hate to say this, but we haven't covered enough. But is there anything else that you want to impart to our viewers, things that they should be aware of, or anything else that we didn't cover today?
Well, I love your mantra, and there's probably something left out of the mantra today from today's conversation, but I think you probably even have the order right in your mantra of food security, water stability. So I think people need to start working on it and don't care too much about price fluctuations. Know that things are cyclical and empires fall sometimes and get reorganized, and a lot of wealth can be made during these times. So try to stay positive and try to be a beacon in your own community in these times, because I think maybe it's your time to shine. Things change. However, you as a person, you're not meant to be afraid of change. You're not meant to be, this is the time for you to kind of shine and put your value where it's worth the most in helping in your community. So I would say, don't fear, but take everything that comes to as an opportunity, because honestly, I think this is probably even a spiritual awakening process, that things are shifting and things will have to change. And sometimes governments or even people, if you have a tight grip on a rope, that means the rope is slipping. So usually governments tend to have a tight hold on their citizens because they know that they're losing control.
Yeah.
So whatever comes, stay positive, because there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but you as a person have to be valuable for your community and be a beacon in that community, and things will shift for the better in the long term, for sure.
Wow. I could not have said that better. I mean, that is such a true statement. And thank you so much for being here today, Arpad. I really, really appreciate it. We need to do something in person. We need to do something.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. And for those, I hope you got as much out of this as I did. This was a phenomenal conversation. It is coming to pass, so take these words to heart and actually make a difference. And there's so many more of us, the public, than there are of the governments and the central bankers. Let's have a nice quiet revolution in sound money. Let's come together in community, locally and globally, to make this a better world for everybody. And until next we meet, please be safe out there. Bye-bye.